The sky was clear that morning. The birds still sang, the sun still warmed the land. But something had shifted in the unseen. The day Job lost everything didn't begin with thunder. It began with silence. One messenger came running. Your oxen and donkeys taken, the servants slain. Before the word settled in his chest, another man arrived, breathless. Fire fell from the sky. The sheep are gone, all gone. Job didn't move. Then a third. The Chaldeans raided the camels. The workers, they're dead. Still he stood. And then the fourth messenger, the one whose voice would break the world. Your sons, your daughters, they were feasting in the oldest brother's home. The wind came suddenly. The house collapsed. There were no survivors. Silence again. Job's knees hit the ground. His robe tore from his body. Dust filled the air as he fell to the earth, not in despair, but in worship. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And yet, the storm wasn't done. His skin blistered. His breath grew shallow. Sores covered him from head to toe. He scraped his wounds with broken pottery, sitting among ashes, his throne now a pile of grief and dust. Once surrounded by laughter, now haunted by echoes. Once full of life, now barely clinging to it. But through all of it, he did not curse God. He wept. He waited. He worshipped. Long before the storms of suffering touched his life, Job lived in the land of Uz, a man of honor, a man of reverence, a man of peace. He wasn't a king, but when he walked, people noticed. When he spoke, others listened. The Bible describes him in one line: blameless and upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. His life was full, not just in wealth, but in the quiet kind of goodness that can only come from walking closely with God. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, children who often gathered for joyful feasts, celebrating life, family, and the blessings God had poured upon them. Job's days began in worship. Even when his children feasted, he would rise early, offering sacrifices on their behalf. Not because they had sinned, but because he loved them that deeply. This is who Job was, not just rich in cattle or silver, but rich in righteousness. Humble in the height of his success, grateful even in his greatness. God had smiled on him. He owned thousands of animals, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and many, many servants. In his time, he was the greatest man among all the people of the East, but he wore that greatness with grace. He didn't brag, he didn't boast, he prayed, and in that sacred stillness, God watched him, as a father watches a child who delights his heart. No one suspected that heaven and hell were about to meet over this man's life. But for now, the air was still. The days were bright, and Job was at peace. God had favored him because Job had made God his center. The sky was clear that morning. The birds still sang, the sun still warmed the land. But something had shifted in the unseen. The day Job lost everything didn't begin with thunder. It began with silence. One messenger came running. Your oxen and donkeys taken, the servants slain. Before the word settled in his chest, another man arrived, breathless. Fire fell from the sky. The sheep are gone, all gone. Job didn't move. Then a third. The Chaldeans raided the camels. The workers, they're dead. Still he stood. And then the fourth messenger, the one whose voice would break the world. Your sons, your daughters, they were feasting in the oldest brother's home. The wind came suddenly. The house collapsed. There were no survivors. Silence again. Job's knees hit the ground. His robe tore from his body. Dust filled the air as he fell to the earth, not in despair, but in worship. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And yet, the storm wasn't done. His skin blistered. His breath grew shallow. Sores covered him from head to toe. He scraped his wounds with broken pottery, sitting among ashes, his throne now a pile of grief and dust. once surrounded by laughter, now haunted by echoes, once full of life, now barely clinging to it. But through all of it, he did not curse God. He wept, he waited, he worshipped. The wind had quieted, but the silence was louder now. Ashes clung to his skin, pain pulsed beneath every breath. And then 3 shadows appeared on the horizon. Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, old friends, trusted men. They had come from far away, each hearing of Job's ruin, each bringing the weight of unspoken questions. When they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. The man who once walked with strength, now broken in body and silent in sorrow. They raised their voices and wept. They tore their robes. They sat beside him in the dust. For 7 days and 7 nights, no one spoke. Not a word, for his pain was too great. But silence doesn't last forever. Eliphaz spoke first, gently at first, but under his words was a sharp edge. You must have sinned, Job, for suffering like this doesn't come without reason. Then Bildad, cold, calculating. If your children died, they must have brought it upon themselves. Then Zophar, harsh, final. You talk too much. If only God would speak, he'd show you your guilt. And in that moment, Job was no longer just wounded in flesh, he was wounded in spirit, alone in grief, misjudged by those who were supposed to comfort. Their presence, once a blessing, now became salt in his open wounds. He looked to heaven and found no answers. He looked to man and found no understanding. So Job did the only thing left. He wept, he waited, and he worshipped. The world outside was quiet, but inside Job, a storm raged. No words, no comfort, only memories and pain. He remembered the laughter of his children, echoing through the halls like music, the scent of feasts, the joy of their voices around the table. Now, silence. He remembered walking among the people, respected, honored. Men would rise when he passed. Strangers sought his wisdom. Now he was a ghost, avoided, forgotten. He remembered holding his wife's hand, the warmth in her eyes. Now, only distance lived between them. She could no longer bear to look at him. He remembered mornings of prayer when he would rise early to offer sacrifices for sins his children might have committed, just in case. He was always careful, always faithful. Yet here he was, scraping boils with broken pottery, sitting in ashes, cursed by the world, crushed in the soul. His mind replayed every moment. Where did I go wrong? What did I miss? Did I fail them? Did I fail him? But there were no answers, only silence. And in that silence, Job broke, not with anger, not with rebellion, but with grief. Tears fell where no one could see, sobs swallowed by the wind. His heart cried out to heaven, but heaven stayed quiet. And yet, even in the ache, even in the emptiness, Job did not curse God. He mourned, he remembered, he waited. Because deep beneath the pain, beneath the shattered faith and fractured hope, a whisper remained. A whisper that said, "He is still God." The sky had not changed. It was still blue, still vast, still far away. But for Job it felt closed, sealed shut, like heaven had turned its face away. He had prayed. Oh, how he had prayed, with broken breath, with torn voice, with trembling hope. But the heavens offered no reply, no thunder, no whisper, no peace, just silence. Job sat with that silence, hour after hour, day after day. While the wounds on his skin ached, the wounds in his soul ran deeper. Where was God? The one he had honored, the one he had obeyed, the one he had trusted with everything? He wasn't angry, not yet, but he was confused. And beneath that confusion, a quiet ache of betrayal. Had he been forgotten? He remembered the days of light, when God's favor felt like breath in his lungs, when every prayer felt heard, every step guided. But now he walked blind, stumbling through ash, alone. Have I sinned? Did I displease you? Have you turned from me? He searched his heart, turned every stone, questioned every motive. Still, nothing. And that made it worse, because if he had done wrong, he could repent. He could make it right. But this This silence was unbearable. He wanted to scream, but what good would it do? The heavens stayed quiet. The wind carried no answer. The stars gave no sign. And so Job did what the brokenhearted do when there is nothing left to say. He wept, not with loud cries, those had already passed, but with quiet surrender. He lay his head on the dust and let the pain be what it was, unanswered. Still no voice came from above, still no sign of God's presence. Still silence. But in that silence, he did not curse, he did not walk away, he simply surrendered. If this is what you have allowed, then I will sit in it. Even if I do not understand, even if you never explain, I will not deny you. It wasn't faith that moved mountains, it wasn't joy, it was something smaller, quieter, more raw. It was trust without reward, love without answers, faithfulness without signs. It was surrender, true surrender. And in that surrender, though God was still silent, something eternal was being written in Job's soul. The silence of heaven did not mean the absence of God. It only meant the story was not finished yet. No longer howled, the ashes had settled. But within Job, something deeper was being torn away. This wasn't just about the loss of wealth or children or health. This was the peeling back of everything. Everything that once made life full. Everything that once made sense. He had no name left among men, no strength left in his bones, no comfort in his own home. Even his own soul felt distant, like a stranger had taken residence in his body. And Job watched himself disappear. He had no offerings left to bring, no altar to kneel before. Even his prayers seemed to vanish in the wind unanswered. He had nothing, not even understanding, and yet he did not curse, he did not bargain, he did not run. He stayed in the ashes, in the confusion, in the silence. This was spiritual stripping, when all outer layers were gone, and the only thing left was faith. Not loud faith, not triumphant or poetic, but faith like a breath, quiet, small, shaken, a whisper that said, if he slays me, still I will trust him. This wasn't about reward anymore, or blessings, or answers. This was about the core of belief, the part of the soul that holds on when there's nothing left to hold. And in that stripped-down place, Job stood naked before the Almighty. No riches, no pride, no mask, only a wounded man clinging to a holy God. And somehow, even in his weakness, his faith became worship. Because true worship isn't the song we sing in abundance. It's the silence we offer in suffering, and Job worshipped. It had been days, weeks, maybe months. The silence had become so loud that it blurred the lines between waiting and giving up. Job sat still, not in rebellion, not in desperation, just still. He had spoken all he could. His friends had said far too much. His heart had bled everything it held. And now the heavens stirred. Then out of the whirlwind God answered, not through a dream, not through a gentle whisper, but from the very storm that Job had feared might destroy him. He did not come with sympathy. He did not arrive with comfort. He came with questions, not to accuse, but to awaken. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? God asked. Brace yourself like a man, Job. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Imagine the moment, the holy weight of it, the voice of the Creator himself finally piercing through the silence. But he did not begin with Job's suffering. He began with creation. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Soft ambient. The sky may have still been gray, Job's body still covered in sores, but everything had shifted because God was no longer silent. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together? The questions rolled like thunder, but they weren't meant to belittle. They were meant to reframe. God asked not to crush Job's spirit, but to lift it above his pain, to remind him that he was not forgotten, that the one who crafted the seas and stars was still in control. Have you ever commanded the morning, Job, or given orders to the dawn? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? The god of galaxies was having a conversation with a man sitting in ashes. That's the mercy hidden inside majesty. Explain the suffering. He did not justify the silence. He simply revealed himself. And sometimes that is the answer. Not why did it happen, but who holds everything together when it does. The winds that once screamed loss now carried the voice of God. The storm that once crushed his heart now became the place of revelation. And Job, he did not argue, he did not demand, he bowed. He said, I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. What if the greatest revelation is not found in the answers we demand, but in the presence we discover when everything else is stripped away? Job met God, not in prosperity, but in pain, not in the temple, but in the whirlwind. And when God spoke, Job no longer needed to speak. The questions faded, the ache softened, the silence was filled, not with solutions, but with word. You are not alone in the silence. You are not forgotten in the ashes. Even the storm is under his voice. Even the questions are wrapped in his care. Be still now. The whirlwind is not your end, it is your encounter. God is not far, he is speaking, he is here, always here. The storm had passed, not just the one in the sky, but the storm within Job. The winds of grief, the waves of silence, the trembling nights of unknowing, they had left him changed, but not destroyed. Job had asked the questions we all ask. Why do the innocent suffer? Where is God when it hurts? What have I done to deserve this? And in return, God had not offered answers, but presence. Not explanation, but revelation. Job had stood before the Almighty, not with pride, but with wonder. Not with defense, but with surrender. And in that moment, he saw something he never saw before, that God was never absent. He was speaking all along, through the silence, through the aches, through the wind and the ashes. And Job understood the purpose wasn't punishment. The pain wasn't meaningless. The silence wasn't abandonment. It was transformation. Suffering had become the fire that burned away his pride. Loss had become the chisel that carved out his faith. Silence had become the space where trust was born. He no longer needed to know why, because he had seen who. The God who measures the seas with his hand, who commands the morning light, who stores snow in secret vaults, and yet sees a broken man sitting in ashes and speaks to him. Job's eyes were opened, not to answers, but to awe. He said, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. And that was enough. He learned that pain is not proof of God's absence. It is often the pathway to his presence. That worship is not born from blessings, but from surrender. That trust is not built in clarity, but in the mystery. And in the end, Job was not just restored in wealth, but in wonder. Not just healed in body, but humbled in spirit. He had lost everything and found God, and that was the purpose in the pain. The silence had ended, the storm had passed, and now the restoration began. Job, once a man of ashes, now stood in the sunlight of a new day, not because he demanded it, not because he deserved it, but because grace had spoken. God did not just return what was lost, he gave double, twice the livestock, twice the wealth, twice the blessing. But more than that, he gave renewal. Sons were born again. Daughters, radiant and strong, were given names, Jemima, Keziah, and Karen Hapuch, names that echoed beauty, strength, and hope. And Job, he lived to see 4 generations, laughed again, loved again, lingered long in a life once shattered, now restored. But here's the mystery. Restoration wasn't just about getting back what was lost. It was about becoming someone new. Job had walked through the fire and come out refined. He had spoken from the pit and now sang from the heights. His heart no longer clung to what could be taken, but to who could not be lost. This was not the reward of a man who passed a test. It was the revelation of a God who redeems, not a transaction, a transformation. For Job, the greatest restoration was not the cattle or coins, but the communion. The God who had once seemed silent now walked with him daily. The God who had seemed distant had drawn near. And so the book closes, not with sorrow, but with song. Not with defeat, but with divine redemption. Job had lost everything, and found everything that mattered. The story draws to a close, not with fireworks, not with answers to every question, but with quiet, holy, gentle quiet. The man who once sat in ashes now walks in peace, not because all was explained, but because God was enough. He had waited through silence, waited through storms, waited through the ache of heaven's hush. And in the waiting, God was not absent, he was working. Job didn't just receive answers, he received presence. Not knowledge about God, but communion with God. And in the end, that was the truest restoration. Not double cattle, not long life, but intimacy. Job walked with the God who answered, softly, tenderly, personally. The God who does not rush. The God who sits with us in ashes and walks with us into sunrise. And maybe that's the greatest truth, that sometimes we find God not in the storm, but in the stillness that follows. In the end, Job didn't win back a life. He discovered a deeper one shaped not by pain or prosperity, but by the one who never left. So the story ends not with a scream, not with a speech, just a quiet closing. The man who waited and the God who answered.